Thank you. Thank you for having me on your channel.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I was very excited to do this as I was going through the scissor wheel and everything like that, and can relate to everybody.
Yeah,
I think we all can.
I think that's why there's been such longevity with the piece because it's very relatable, not just for Italians but for families.
Well, yeah, and everybody kind of has that similar kind of background, I suppose.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, I certainly want to talk about that and things, but just for everybody, what's your Italian background? Because I believe you're first generation. Is that right?
Yes, I'm the son of Sicilian immigrants, and my background is my family comes from Mazzara del Vallo, Sicily, and they came here in 1949. Like after the war, the typical story. There was poverty, so they came here for better life. Um, Actually, there was a brief moment when my paternal grandparents were here working. So my father actually was born here, but he was brought back like when he was, maybe a year old. So that made him a citizen, which allowed him to come here later on. And then he sent for my mother. So then they settled in Manhattan and in Greenwich Village on Carmine Street, and then from there they went to Brooklyn, and that's where I was born in Brooklyn.
So what year did they come? They came
They
after the war.
came they came in 1949 after the war. My Yeah, that's when they arrived.
So did they have to? Because I'll tell you why I asked. My uncle and his family came around the same time. Actually, they got to America in 1954,
Hmm.
but they had to wait in Canada for like 4 or 5 years.
Right.
Now, did your family were they able to come direct in?
Well, because my father was born here when my
Oh,
grandparents came here, and even though he went back at the year and a
oh,
half, so I don't even consider him. I mean, I consider him like I consider myself the child of Sicilian immigrants. So I guess technically I'm only first generation on one side, but he didn't know from America, you know. But because he had that, he was born here. He was able to come here easily, and then he sent for my mother. They were already married, and my brother
oh,
was born in Sicily, and then my sister and I were born here.
oh. So that's an interesting story. So
Yeah.
now, why did your grandparents go back?
Well, as I said, things were so tough in Sicily at the time. There was such poverty that they came here uh, to just try to work, and they did. My grandfather was a longshoreman. I think my grandmother was a seamstress, and then but they already had property back in Sicily, so that's why they went back and cultivated that.
Oh, so that's interesting.
Yeah,
That's
and I
interesting.
also had some aunts here, not great aunts, which were my grandmother's sisters, which they were sponsored to come here, but they didn't stay.
Oh, so yeah, so yours is a very interesting story.
Yeah,
I've interviewed a couple of people whose families had gone back,
yeah,
and so your father, so he went back,
yeah.
and then I guess he was in his 20s or something when he got back there.
Early 20s, he had it in his mind, America, America. I want to go to America. My mother wasn't so keen on it. They were newly married, but my
Mm,
father was,
mm.
and so yeah, they came here. Yeah. So
Wow.
my father thrived, with it. My mother had a really hard time, which caused other issues later.
Yeah, and I can imagine
Yeah,
because
because basically her family was there, but there was a lot of my father's family here. Like I said,
mm,
aunts, and there were a lot of aunts here. Yeah,
wow, that's some story. Well, I guess she adapted after a while, huh?
not quite.
No.
She never did.
Oh,
So much so
that's
that
funny, but it's sad, in a
yeah,
way.
yeah, so much so that it. No, actually, I take that back. She did acclimate. I take it back. She acclimated in many, many ways, and she made the best of it. But as I said, her parents, just a lot of her family was there, and she was homesick. It was basically, I think, what it was. But I have to say, as I think back now, she did make a go of it. It was hard, because my mother never really learned the language. It was a Sicilian dialect, that we spoke. My
Hmm.
father was more out in the world. He spoke broken English, but my mother, stayed insular.
Yeah, yeah. Um, that's yeah, it's fascinating,
The
fascinating. So,
stories.
yeah. So now, have you been to the hometown?
Yes, because what happened is, my mother was having a hard time in the 60s. Her father passed away, my grandfather, and she was having some. She was really emotionally. She was struggling. So back in those days, they didn't say see someone for therapy or help. What the doctor said is, she's homesick. Go back to go back to Sicily. And plus, her father had just passed away, so she went back and she took me. So I was 7, and I went with her. We didn't go with the whole family. She just took me, and it was just her and I, because my father was working and my brother and sister were in school, and so I went and that was a culture shock for me at the age of 6 because back then Sicily was kind of primitive. Wasn't as beautifully
Hmm.
developed and
Hmm.
chic as it is now. So
Right.
the chickens were running through the streets, and and the ladies were hanging out their laundry, and the funeral processions were going through the middle of the town, and it was something that I went, where am I? It was a culture shock. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's something.
So I stayed
Well,
there
the
for.
chickens are still running around because I just saw a post from Michael Cavallari's wife with the chickens running around. So,
Yeah, and the streets were unpaved, but and I stayed there for 3.5 months, with her. So, and I saw a whole different side of her that I'd never seen before because she was home. She was
y-
where she grew up. So,
yeah. So
but
now, do you still have? I guess you still have family there because
I
you're
have
originally
I
there.
have cousins, but
Yeah.
I in the story of blood type ragu, my story, what happened is that my parents, had a volatile relationship. They didn't believe in divorce, but they decided to separate. Yeah, when I was in hot, I think like just out of elementary school, but they still lived in the same house. That was,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
because being Catholic, they don't divorce. And then what happened is that, out of the shame of that, they just excommunicated the whole family. They didn't want to air out their dirty laundry. So what happened is that we lost touch with aunts and uncles and cousins and people in Sicily and family here. And so I remember my external family as a child, but basically I grew up without their presence. So I had gone there when I was 6, and then I didn't know from them.
Hmm.
And then when I got married, I never in my life dreamed that I would marry my wife, Teresa, who has a Sicilian background as well, and her parents came from Sicily. So when we got married, my in-laws at that time lived 6 months here, and they had a house in Sicily. So we got married here. We had a reception here, but then we had another reception in Sicily to meet that side of the family. So my wife, the towns Mazzara del Vallo, and where she's from, Buccheri, is is on the other side of the island. But she said to me, and I was already, in my early 30s at that time, and she said to me, "You're coming all this way. Don't you think you want to look them up?" And I said, I don't know. I don't know them, And then so she, kept saying, well, it might be healing, to go there. And also the other thing that made me say yes to this is once my parents separated, there was more room for my father to reconnect with the family. So he had reconnected with them because it was no longer that, you know, uh, divide. And he was scheduled to go to Sicily, and he had a heart attack 10 days before he was going to go
Oh,
after
wow.
not seeing his family for many, many years. So, so for that reason, I thought, well, maybe I should do it, because he never made it, and I will do it for him.
Mm.
So I went to the town, and my hand was shaking when I was ringing my aunt's doorbell because I was carrying like the stories of who cursed us and who did that to us and who, and this story and that story, and I was also carrying the shame of my family's story. So, but I had faint memory of them when I was 7, and so I rang the doorbell and my aunt answered the door. At first, she didn't recognize me, but then she figured it out. And the first thing she said to me is, she goes, "You look like the fruit peel of your father."
Mm.
So, we sat down, we had coffee, and we just connected. I told her the story. My uncle came out, and he was blind by that time, and they started telling me stories about my parents when they were children, and then and then um, I I saw a picture of my actor's headshot on their credenza in
Wow.
Sicily.
Wow.
And I said to them, "That's me." And they said, "Yeah, that's you." I said, "What is it doing here?" And my uncle said to me, "Your father sent it to us with a letter of that he was coming here, and he sent a picture of you, and he wrote of how proud he was of you."
Oh, wow.
And I never heard my father ever say to me, "I love you," nothing like that. I mean, we had a kind of it was he was old school. So those words penetrated my heart, and I said, "He's proud of me, and he sent you this picture. So I
I
said,
could see, I could see, I could see it in your face that it's
I know. I said, what was he like before he came to America? So my uncle took a moment, and in his blindness, like touched the walls to get to his room, and he brought out this picture, and he goes, "This was in your nonna's house her entire life. She kissed it whenever she passed it. When I died, I took it, but I don't have my eyes to appreciate it." And then he handed it to me. I turned it around. It was this huge, like bigger than 16 by 20, 8 by a black and white old fashioned photo of my father at 4 years old.
wow.
And he was dressed up like Lord Fauntleroy, like the big, you know, bow tie. And then my uncle said to me, uh, "Take it home and know where you come from,"
Mm,
he said.
wow.
And so I was reduced to just tears, you know, and my wife was crying, and we were all crying, and it was crazy. And then I reconnected with them, and then when we got back to the hotel, I said to my wife, "I have to write about this. This is," because I was already writing stories about my upbringing, but they were just comedy. And when I wrote, I said, "But this is not going to be a comedy. This is going to be comedy with some, I mean, a drama with comedic overtones."
Hmm.
And then I enrolled in a class, and I developed a one-man show. I played 22 characters. I wrote the story, and the play, aside from the success of the play, I just started to reconnect with my. It got a review in the New York Times. So cousins started to find out, and family here started to find out, and they came to the show, and I reconnected with all of them. So anyway, that's the long-winded version.
No, no, that's no, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. I mean, I mean, I know how you felt. I mean, I got emotional when I met my dad's first cousins that I never knew existed when
Yeah.
we went there. And it is something. So, in fact, somebody just posted on Facebook the other day. I'm going to Italy for the first time. Where should I go? I said hometown.
Yes.
Forget Rome.
Yes. Yes.
You might as
And
well go to New York City.
where's a good place to go if you don't, you had family there, but you don't know, like, who. Go to the cemetery,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
speak to the clerk, there, because they have all the records.
Well, I've talked to with lots of people who've gone there and they've walked down the street and or they'll knock on a door and they'll find family, or they'll walk in a bar or a cafe and they'll see somebody that looks like them, or their father or their uncle, and
Yeah.
they'll say, Sorrentino, and they'll say, "Yeah, me too."
Yeah, yeah. Well, Sorrentino is a pretty common
That's a
name.
pretty common name,
You
right?
know, Ingrasciotta is not such a common name, so you can find Ingrasciottas. You know, there aren't a lot of them, so you
Yeah, well,
do.
that's like my grandmother's my maternal grandmother. She's pure Malo, and that's just her family's the only family. That's
Yeah,
her family.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's really cool, and the fact that you play 22 characters is was really neat too. Uh, so Ragu. So I have to ask you, especially since you're first generation. So sauce or gravy?
Ah, no, it's absolutely sauce. It's absolutely sauce. I never heard the word gravy. I mean, but I spoke a Sicilian dialect growing up in my house, so it was la salsa. You know, it was or ragu. You know, which is the meat sauce. It was never gravy. That's a more. I mean, I know there's a big controversy, and you might get, you know, you know, comments about it, but my in my home, gravy was for meat,
Well, you
and
know what's funny about yeah, well, exactly. I mean, that's kind of the way we were,
right,
but like if my mother made sauce or my aunts made sauce without meat, they would call it marinara,
right,
right? But
right,
if but we always had if it was meat in it, they would always say gravy meat. They put the
right.
gravy meat on the table, you know.
Right.
So,
But if you went to Italy, I mean, it's succo,
oh,
you know,
yeah,
that's the
yes, right.
gravy. So they don't know from the gravy. And
No,
so if you're, that's a more Americanized, not even Italian American, I'll call it American Italian development. And, you know, I understand why people, you know, are defense strong about it, that because that's how they grew up. Usually it's ask a grandmother or a great grandmother, nobody's going to answer gravy.
no.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're not. I'm sure they're not. So you have to. So you have to do this for me. Um, The, was it your grandmother that was jumping in the grave or your aunt or
My paternal grandmother.
that was so funny.
Yeah.
Because I could as you were doing it, I could see it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And they had to hold it back, and then and I'm impressionable, you know. So I'm 7 years old. My mind was taking pictures like a camera. I had never seen anything like that before because I had never seen a dead body before, and they laid, you know, they laid. My grandfather. Okay, so my mother and I go there. My mother's going there for some rest and relaxation to, you know, gather her thoughts and to also grieve her father. And when I got there, my paternal grandfather died 2 days later. So I got to meet him on his deathbed, and I could. He was trying to speak to me, and all I could smell was something that I later realized was like the smell of death, you
I know
know.
I've heard
And
that
then
once.
my cousin 2 nights after that experience comes knocking on the door in the middle of the night saying, you know, Nono died. So my mother grabs, you know, everything and, you know, dresses. She didn't even have a black wardrobe, but of course she had to dress in black. So I think she borrowed things from my grandmother. She went over there and we opened the beaded curtains and there was this body laid out in the middle of the room, which was my grandfather. And then every it was a dead stillness of quiet. But then as soon as I walked in, everybody lost it. Everybody was, and then I realized that would get quiet until the next person walked in, and then they would go nuts, you know, and they would like show the body and show the person and bring the person to the body, and it was in my mind to protect myself as a kid from the volatility in my own family, between my mother and father. I would tune out and see everything as a Bugs Bunny cartoon. That was my like,
Hmm.
like see it in a cartoon like way because it was my savior, you know. So when I saw that, it looked like a cartoon to me, but it was really happening. So yeah, when they brought they paraded in those days. There were no hearses, so they paraded my grandfather through the streets in the black horse and buggy, and the neighbors were coming out. I remember this. So my neighbors were coming out with pieces of paper in their hand, putting in like prayers,
Oh
saying, "Say
wow.
oh, hello to my husband Nunzio in heaven." They were
Oh
going
wow.
up to the casket and putting like these other prayers in there. And then when we got to the gravesite, that's when my grandmother, yeah. So and then she said, "I don't want to be with you. I want to be with him," in a very dramatic way. So that was my first experience 2 days after I arrived, and
Jesus.
so I never forgot it. You know.
No, I don't know how you could. Uh, my parents were on the younger part of their family. My father had five in his family. My mother had nine.
Hmm.
Um, so my grandparents were older, and so geez, probably it was about this. Yeah, I was probably 8 when uh, I think my uncle died before my grandfather, my mother's sister's husband. And so yeah, so I kind of grew up in that thing with everybody wearing black, and same thing, if somebody walks in and scream, then they're all laughing, and
Yes.
then the next person comes in and they're screaming again, and they're all laughing. And I tell my wife, I joke with my wife, I tell her, I want the 3 days, twice a day, the whole deal. I want
Yeah.
everybody there. And she said, "I'm not doing that." I said, "If you're gonna have to do it, I'll come back. I'll want you." But yeah, so through the late 50s, early 60s, there was, once or twice a year, there was always something like that. But, um, and I mean, certainly, I guess, yeah, back then, they probably still had them in the house and everything. There's probably no funeral
In the
parlors.
smaller towns, they do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
and they do still parade in the smaller towns. You'll see, but they do. You know, they cremate them. Um, Not everybody, the family can choose to do that. You know, if they want a cremation, but they usually just, have them laid out in the house for
yeah. All right,
a
so we
day.
got through the morbid part of the interview.
Right.
so, so
But the bigger towns, there are funeral homes.
So the 22 characters that you do, who do you do?
I do my parents, I do my brother and sister, I do my eccentric neighbors on the block because my mother had a nickname for everybody. I do my my father's quote unquote other woman, whom my mother affectionately called the Butana,
Oh,
and
yeah, of course. Yeah.
and because she came into the picture later in my father's life, um, and other people, just other people, aunts, uncles, other people along the way. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, actually, she was an old girlfriend, and she introduced me to my wife. But her father he had the Butana around the block, around the corner, and he had another family there.
Right, right.
And
And you know
they were Sicilian too, by the way. So must be a
what?
Sicilian thing.
I know, and you know what was so funny is that yeah, when I met her, anyway, I'll just say it. I won't hold back. When I met her, she was unlike anything I had ever seen. And I went, "This is who." Like this is. My mother said, "This is what he winds up with, a gorilla with lipstick." So so anyway, my father was such a different man, and I'm because like you know doing things that I had never seen him do, in our household or with my family, and I'm like, who is this guy? So it was interesting, but that didn't end well either. It was just the stories, but I wrote about it. It
Well,
gave me a story to tell.
yeah, no, sure, sure. That's we all have great stories to tell about, growing up in the Italian household and
Yeah,
stuff like that.
when I do her, she gets the biggest laughs. When I embody her, and play her as a character because she's so off the wall. You know, yeah. She can never
uh,
say. She would say stuff like, I I would go over there and she would go. I would be eating and she goes, "More sorrel, Frank," and I was like, "What is?" I thought she would say more sorrel, and I was saying, "What is sorrel?" And she goes, "You're Italian and you don't know more sorrel." And I was like, "What is she talking about?" So she picked up the mozzarella on the table and she handed it. She was more sorrel.
so I take it she wasn't Italian.
No, no. In a back, way back. Yeah,
Well, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, that's funny.
she
That's
has some
funny.
Italian. Yeah, yeah.
And so the family started in You said the village, yeah?
Yeah, in Greenwich Village by Our Lady of Pompeii. That was
Oh,
the
wow.
first apartment was on Carmine Street. That was very Italian in those days.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, sadly, all those neighborhoods
Yeah,
are all
it's
gone.
gone. Yeah.
It's
Then they moved to Brooklyn, and then we moved to Ridgewood, which was on the borderline of Brooklyn and Queens.
oh, I lived in Ridgewood for a
Yeah,
while.
yeah. My parents were finally able to buy
What
a
street?
house.
Where did they live?
1406 Willoughby Avenue between Cypress and St. Nicholas. That was.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I lived on Fresh Pond Road.
Oh my God. Yeah. What high school did you go to?
Well, I grew up in Queens. I grew up in College Point, so I went to
Oh,
Monte
okay.
Christi High
Okay.
School
Yeah.
in Astoria or Long Island City, depending on who you ask. But then I got divorced, and I had friends who lived on Fresh Pond Road, and so this is funny. So it was like Memorial Day weekend, and I have went and looked at this apartment. It was over it was electrician. A man was an electrician. A wife would be in the store, and I went on, I think, on Thursday or Friday of Memorial Day weekend and talked to her. And they were Italian. She Italian with accents, right? Real
Hmm.
Italian.
Hmm.
And she said, so somebody else already wants the apartment. So I said, oh, okay, well, that's fine. And then I guess the Tuesday she called me up and she said, don't you want the apartment? And I said, I thought you said something else. I don't like him. You're a nice Italian boy. So if you want the apartment, it's yours. So I said, yes, I did. It was great. It was really like almost like a studio, but it was 2 rooms and it was 3 apartments in the place. And I was there from, let's say, 77 through 85. And I loved it there. It was a great place.
So we
It was,
lived in the same area, you know.
yeah.
What Fresh Pond and what?
Fresh Pond and, geez, I don't remember the cross
Is it
streets, but I
Green,
was, where,
Madison?
yeah, I think Madison, where the theater was, the movie theater?
Yes, yes.
Like a block down from there.
The Oasis.
The Oasis, right,
Yes.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
And by
Okay.
Colama, right there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So if you walk, about I guess a little less than a mile, then you'd find me. Yeah, I went to Grover Cleveland High School, so that was
Yeah,
my.
I have friends who went there. Yeah, I
Yeah,
know
yeah.
exactly where, because we used to go to the Eagle's Nest.
Yes, me too. For,
Fantastic place.
for burgers.
Yes, the
That was
best
on
burgers ever.
that was on Onderdonk or Woodward
Yes,
or
on the
something.
dunk, on the dunk.
That's funny. Okay. Yeah, we used to go for burgers. That was a great
They
place.
had the best
Yeah.
hamburgers. I don't know if it's still there. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'll tell you, we were in that place one day, my friend Ralph and I, and we were just getting ready to walk out, and this car comes flying down the block and hits the cement, the brick part between the Eagle's Nest and I guess the apartment building, whatever, and airborne crashes into the thing. And we were almost walking out the door. The bartender nearly had a heart attack because he was standing right there. And apparently she had a fight with her boyfriend or something and jumped in his car. She didn't have a license, jumped in this car, flew down the block and lost control and
Oh
almost went
God.
through the glass window.
I have a faint memory of that. I think it even made it into like the
Oh,
paper.
I'm sure it did. I'm sure it
Yeah.
did. It must have been, had to be, I don't know if I was married. It had to be 73, 74, somewhere
Yeah.
around there.
And
Mid 70s.
I was just starting high school at that time. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It was nuts. It
I
was really,
know.
really crazy.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
well, that's interesting. Yeah. So we have that
In
in common.
common.
But like I said, that was a great Fresh Pond Road was great because everything was on the way to the subway and on the way back.
There was a disco there called the Arena that I used to go to every a lot because I
Yeah,
was
I
very
know.
big into the disco world back then.
Yeah, well, I lived right across the street from the Greenery.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was right across the street.
Right. And there was an Italian restaurant. I can't remember the name now. Oh, we used to go there sometimes after. I did a lot of theater in high school, so we used to go there a lot after Jimmy's. Was it Jimmy's? Do you remember that restaurant?
Where was it?
Mm,
Was it
it's
by
not too
the?
far from the Oasis, but on the across the street on the other side.
I mean, it sounds familiar. It
Yeah, it
sounds
was.
familiar. Uh, the Greenery one time. This is now this fits in because there's an Italian story. The Greenery. Um, I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning one morning to the sound of the shouting going on in the street outside the Greenery. Right. So I look out the window and I see uh, a guy laying in the street with his head on the curb, and there's two guys kicking him. Right. So I'm like, "Oh, what's going on here?" So anyway, somehow this guy gets away and he runs across the street diagonal, and he starts walking back towards the guys who were beating him up. And the one guy says, "I thought I told you to get the F out of here." And the guy goes, boom, takes a
Oh,
shot at him.
yeah.
Right. So now he's chasing this guy around the mailbox, shooting. Right. And at one point he had him. I mean, he had him right. He had him like this. He had him, and something kicked in, and he didn't shoot.
Hmm.
He turned around and walked away.
Wow.
Uh, so 5 minutes after that, police car rolls up. Any problems over here? No. Okay. They drive away. They drive away.
Nothing to
About 10,
see.
about 10, yeah, not, about 10 minutes after that, the guys who were doing the fighting were probably, 20s,
Mm.
mid 20s or something like that. The crowd that would have been in the green. And so now the next generation shows up, right? And they start guys smacking this kid around in the middle of the street.
Wow.
What are you, stupid? What's wrong with you? So whoever was in charge,
Yeah.
quote unquote, uh, and so the next day I come out of the house and I said, "Yeah, I wonder if is he really shoot? Did I imagine this or something like that?"
Hmm.
The bullet holes were in the window, but he was shooting wild,
Wow.
so the bullets were hitting high instead of going through. If they went through the window, it was late at night. Maybe who knows who was there. But I knew the owners pretty good there because I lived across the street, and when my wife and I were dating, we used to go there every Friday night. She used to come from the city with me, and we go have dinner over there.
Mhm.
And I think the guy, his name was John, the guy who one of the owners or
Right.
whoever ran it. And I tell my wife to this day, I said, we only got the best food because John had the hots for you. She's Sicilian and Puerto Rican. I said, that's why we always got the best table and the best food. And
Right.
she says, no, you're crazy. I said, no, trust me. I could see the look. I saw the look in his eyes when he would walk in. He wasn't doing it for me. Um, so did you have an Aunt Mary?
My mother's name was Maria.
Well,
Um,
yeah. So there had to
yes, yeah,
be,
of
yeah,
course, of course. I had a few. I had a few Zia Marias. Yeah,
yeah, naturally.
it runs through the family. How could it not?
So I always like to ask, especially in your case. So what did you eat growing up as a kid? And what did you eat? Mostly Italian food, I guess. Yeah,
Every night.
yeah.
Yeah, it was always. Well, I have a whole thing in this show about my mother's conveyor belt arms transporting the food from the kitchen to the table. So it would be like, usually we would start out with some kind of macaroni or pasta with a vegetable, and then a second course, which would be some kind of protein. So it was like, I'm surprised I wasn't huge, uh, but it was like the first and then the second, So that would be some kind of chicken dish or with a salad and a vegetable. But, you know, pasta fagioli, pasta, everything. Every night was pasta. Saturday was his day of rest. We didn't have pasta. And then Sunday, of course, was the traditional big pasta. So it was pasta every night. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
didn't have. I mean, I didn't have that. My mom would cook. My father loves steak and stuff like that. So, but we kind of had the menu for every day of the menu was the same every day of the week. Monday
Mhm.
was this, Tuesday was that, Wednesday was this,
Right, right.
Thursday was always. We used to go to my grandmother's house because my mother would take care of my grandmother, so we always had pasta. And then, like you
Right.
said, on Sunday, um, we would usually usually go to my grandmother's house,
Hmm.
and then whoever would show up, because we had such a big family too,
Right.
like my grandmother's birthday and things like that. There would be 75 to 80 people in
Yeah.
my grandmother's backyard,
When I was
which
very young, we used to have some at
yeah,
somebody's house. You
yeah,
know.
I miss those days, man.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very. It doesn't exist, really.
No, I know it's so sad, and that's why I try to do this because we got to preserve it. At least the stories,
I
if
think
nothing
it's
else.
great. I think it's great that you do this, and because yes, the stories do need to be preserved. It's a time. Although I have to say, like when I tell when I tell the story, I get people from other cultures coming up to me and saying it's still that way for me. You know, um, like what the daughter went through in the family, or the families getting together, like a Latino, Asian populations, different Muslim populations. They'll say that's still going on in my house.
Yeah, well, and that's great, and we're all connected in one way, shape,
Yeah, but
or
people
form.
move away. That's what happens. Who moves out of state? Who moves, to New Jersey, Long Island, whatever. So
Well, that's it. I mean, my grandparents lived in Corona,
yeah,
and it was 95% Italian. I mean, you'd walk down the street
yeah,
and everybody was speaking Italian.
yeah. I have friends
Uh,
from there.
yeah, and naturally all the stores were all Italian, and
Right.
and uh, y- all the old ladies wore black except for my grandmother. My mother's mom, she wore it for 3 days, and then she put on the Vestalia
Yeah,
with the
yeah,
flowers.
Vestalia. La Vestalia. I remember that. Yeah, my mother didn't like black. She goes, "Me fa un'impressione." Like she would be like, it's impression. I don't like it because so she would never. Matter of fact, she was very hip for her time because she made her own clothes. But I want to say once a grandmother passes away, or the parents pass away, it becomes a whole. I mean, you still see the family, but the main
I know what
patriarch
you
or
mean.
matriarch of the family, no, the matriarch of the family is gone, then it gets, sort of separated.
No, I know exactly what you mean. Then the families start going their own way. But I always tell people, uh, I had 9 mothers and fathers in my mother's family because
Yeah,
my uncles and aunts were like my parents,
yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and they treated you like it,
yeah,
I mean, the love was there, but also, you got the shot in the back of the head if you did something
yeah.
wrong,
Right. Yeah, that's beautiful. See, I didn't have that because of the state of what was going on in my home. But I remember, but in younger years, like in my single digit years, I do remember that. So it's uh, it's
So do you
nice.
so do you have siblings? Do you have brothers and sisters?
I have one brother. He's passed away. I have a sister. She's still with us, and yeah. So, uh, yeah. So I'm the youngest.
Yeah, yeah. I'm in the middle, so that's always the
Uh,
toughest one. That's the toughest place to be in the middle.
yeah, yeah.
I was always too young to do what my brother did and too old to do what my sister did.
Right, right.
So
Yeah, yeah. With me, it was the youngest was in. I took on a lot. What my father wasn't able to give my mother. I mean, you're a prince, but then there's a price to pay.
hmm,
You know.
it must have been very difficult for you. I'm
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
I'm I'm,
yeah. It
I'm
was.
sure.
Yeah, but she was
Um,
resilient. I got to give it to her. Hand it to her. Extremely creative, extremely talented, and she was. My word for her was fierce. She was fierce.
well, and I've said this before. Italian women, they were the backbone of the
Oh yeah.
family. The men were led to believe that they were in charge,
Yes.
but the women were really the backbone of the family.
Absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Yeah. And it was like it was a front because really in those times, I mean, I don't know, not so much now, but that society was more of a matriarchal society.
Yeah, no, it was, and everything. I remember everything kind of revolved around my mother's mom more than my father's mother, because I guess because we were at my mother's family's house more often. Um, but yeah, and they were, my aunts, you know, cooking in the kitchen like the weather we're having now, right? They would be in the kitchen, no air conditioning,
I know.
pumping out food,
I know. I
no
don't know.
complaints.
No, I know. How do they do it? And clean the house and wash the clothes and, you know.
Yeah, did you have the plastic on the couch? We had the
Oh yeah.
plastic on the
In this weather, I would sweat on it. I had the plastic flowers, and I had the plastic slip covers. I had the plastic runners
Yes,
that
yes.
that turned yellow. So when my mother when my mother couldn't part with them, so when they sold the house and moved out because they said after I moved out, um, my mother moved to an apartment, and after she passed away, I'm going through her things, and I I go to the upper closet. I said, "What is this?" It was the plastic runners. She rolled them up. They were like this color of yellow and brown, unrecognizable, and it had congealed. She
That's so
couldn't.
funny.
So when we pulled up the runners when she moved out, that part of the rug was pristine,
Yeah.
and the rest of it was like worn down.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I mean, I never sat in the living room of my house. Christmas, we got to sit in the living room. But my my mother's brother-in-law, my uncle Nick, he had he owned an oil company, oil delivery, and my mother had this gold chair, like wing kind of chair, in the living room. And my uncle would come when he delivered the oil. He would come in, and my mother would always, Nick, you want a cup of coffee? Oh, sure. And he would go sit in that chair just to make my mother nuts.
See, we had the basement, and
Yes.
and
Yeah.
that's where everybody, like, there were like 100 people, and everybody would be like this in the basement. Meanwhile, there's the rest of the house that was just for show.
Yeah. I mean, we basically lived in the basement too.
Yeah,
Everybody lived down there. Of course, you had the kitchen down there and
right.
all of that. Um, but yeah, I mean, we had the kitchen upstairs. I remember as young, because we lived in College Point. We had a small, like, split level kind of house. Um, so very young, we were upstairs, and then when the basement was finished, that
Oh
was it.
yeah.
But we would sleep down there in the summer because it
It
was
was
cooler.
cooler. That was always their excuse, but there was no light down there. There was a skylight, and that's it. There was a stove and refrigerator. But we would be like, I would call it the refuge lot. Like we would be like the dungeon. Meanwhile, we had this whole like house upstairs, and every once in a while for a special occasion, Easter, that was opened up. But there was I always imagined this imaginary museum rope off. We couldn't. So I would always walk past it to go down to the basement. That's where everybody, sort of hung
Oh,
out.
that's funny. That's real funny. Yeah, we would walk through it to get to the next, the level where the bedrooms were, of course. And like I said, the Christmas tree was usually there.
Yeah,
Later on, my mother would put it downstairs, but when we were kids, the Christmas tree would be in the
right,
in the the living room.
right. Younger people won't know this, but we know it.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
was a,
and
it
it
was a
was
whole it was a whole Italian. I can't even say it was Italian. It was an Americanized Italian thing. That families did, and wasn't only here. It was like in Australia and Canada too. I would tell the story, and they go, "Yeah, we had that."
yeah, yeah, yeah. I've interviewed a couple of people in Australia, and
Yeah,
there are such similarities, and I had no idea. They had their immigration after the war mostly, and a
yeah,
lot of Calabrians went to Australia. Um, I was shocked to find out
a
that there's
lot.
such a large
Yeah,
population of Calabrians
yeah.
that went there. So with them, there were also, there's a lot of, first generation and things like that. Well, Frank, this has been so much fun. I love it. I mean, we probably could go on for another 3 hours here,
Yeah, yeah.
um, which wouldn't be a bad thing, by the way.
I just do want to say though, if people want to see the show,
Yes, I was
it's
going to ask
it's
you. Yeah.
yeah, it's streaming live. Not streaming live. What am I? We're streaming live. It's streaming on a streaming service called BroadwayOnDemand.com, And if you type in blood type ragu, you can see the show. I'm not. I'm writing it into a screenplay now, so
Oh,
I'm not
nice.
performing it live as much. But the live off Broadway production is on BroadwayOnDemand.com, so they can watch it there.
Right, and you also have a couple of websites, right?
Yeah, I have frankactordirector.com, and the website for the show is bloodtyperagu.com. So on there you could purchase the script, and also keep up with things that I'm doing. I also teach memoir writing and acting, so they can keep up with my latest things. Or just join Facebook or Instagram. They can follow me there. It's
Yeah, no, that's fantastic.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's blood type ragu, I think. Frank Ingrasciotta. Yeah.
All right, that's really really cool, and let's hope people go out there. I'll have to watch the whole thing. I only got to watch the sizzle reel.
Yeah. To watch the whole thing, you have to go on the streaming service. But I know I know you resonate because I talk about those streets that
Do
you
you
talk.
really?
Yes. I talk about Willoughby Avenue and the neighbors and all of that. I talk about it until I moved away from it. So the play evolves. It goes from the age of 7 to my early 30s.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Great,
yeah,
great. I
yeah.
don't remember the early 30s anymore. So. I have a
But
memory or two of 7, but
thank you so much. It was such a pleasure speaking to you. I didn't know we had so many things in common.
yeah. Well, we always wind up finding those things out.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't go away. I'm just gonna stop the recording here.
Yes, okay.